Hey, JD here. Welcome to the Mead House. You know, over the past several years, we've brought you over 150 episodes of mead making education, information, and entertainment. More than 100 guests have stopped by the Mead House, professional mead makers, medal-winning home mead makers, competition organizers, experts on yeast and honey, and brewers just like you and me have all visited to share their knowledge. Hey, the Mead House is produced for home mead makers and brewers looking for a bit of inspiration and information from the many guests and discussions we have here at the house. You can help support the Mead House by joining the Mead House Keyholder Club on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and search for the Mead House. There's also a link in the show notes. For as little as $2 a month, you can become a keyholder. We've teamed up with some great companies to provide thank you gifts for your support. So get on over to Patreon, join the Mead House Keyholder Club, and get your own set of keys to the Mead House. You can listen to the Mead House podcast with your favorite player, and be sure to rate us 5 stars on iTunes or your favorite listening venue. The Mead House, mead making entertainment you just don't want to miss. Hey, welcome to the Mead House. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking about this Irish whiskey coffee deal thing that I was drinking during the show. And I told you that I would put the recipe up on the website. Well, I finally did. It's on our website, themeadhouse.com. And it's a pretty versatile drink. In other words, there's a lot of variations that you can do with it. I also put those up on the recipe as well, so make sure you check that out. And that's kind of in honor of St. Patrick's Day. I mean, come on, it's coffee, but it does have some Irish whiskey in it. So hey, again, welcome to the Mead House. Jeff and Ryan are both here. My name is JD Webb. Hey, thanks for listening to episode number 152. You know where to find us, iTunes, Stitcher Radio. The whole list of everything is right there on the front page of the website, themeadhouse.com. Hey, in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about malts and all the different kinds. We may even get into a little bit of steeping grains too, as well, in segment 1. And then in segment 2, actually, we're going to start out with some updates on the Iron V. Jeff and Ryan both have the 411 on that. So we'll get right into that before we get to segment 1. And then in segment 2, again, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, we're going to toss around some ideas. Maybe talk about some of the malts and steeping grains that we talked about in the first segment. You might want to put together a red ale braggot or some kind of Irish braggot that you want to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with. And, of course, in segment 3, we're going to cover Facebook, friends. This is where we try to answer questions with no formal expertise other than what we've experienced in our own brew room. All that and more here at the Mead House. But first, say a big thank you to all the Mead House key holders. You guys keep the Mead House podcast free. And you too can become a Mead House key holder if you're not yet, and help support the show for as little as $2 a month. We've got some great thank you gifts to send to you. Just get on over to patreon.com, search for the Mead House, or just click the link in the show notes. What are we drinking tonight, guys? I have another bottle, Ryan. This may be actually, I've got a couple more left from you. This one says Dark Braggot Melter. And it's still a little on the cold side. I did take a sip earlier. It's got kind of a it's got a tartness to it. I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. I don't get that from other porters or stouts that I've had. This one, you said is made from the Melter honey. Why don't you explain what the Melter honey is?
Yeah, so this one is Jonathan Gardner at Gardner Bees, his Melter honey, and it's essentially, now I might butcher this, but as they are spinning the combs and extracting all the honey, then what they do is they heat to get those last bits of honey out. And that's essentially your melter honey. A lot of times it's called also like baker's special honey or things like that. It's almost like your instant Bochet that, you know, it's been heated, you know, so it's not going to have necessarily the great aromatics of, say, you know, your varietals, but it's got this, almost caramelization a little bit to it, and it gives you some different flavor notes to play with. I really enjoy it. Jonathan is pretty active on a couple of the Facebook groups and does ship across the country, so I'll give him a nice plug. He's been a supporter of the Iron Bee, and I enjoyed using it.
It's got a nice roastiness to it. I like that part. Of course, it's you know, it's pretty cold. And again, I might just let this sit here for a little while and keep sipping on it, and maybe I'll get back to it before the end of the show. In my other hand, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, I poured me a couple of fingers of an Irish whiskey. This is a single pot still Irish whiskey. This is Green Spot. And I think you probably heard me talk about the other one that I really like, Red Spot, maybe a few weeks back. This is Green Spot. This is really smooth also. I really like this stuff. So far, the Green Spot, I had Yellow Spot at O'Brien's here a couple of weeks ago. My wife and I enjoy that. Of course, the one that they turned us on to initially, Ryan, what was the name of it? I got to turn around and look. Let's see. Well, I can't even see the bottle. But there's another Irish whiskey that we really like too. Maybe I'll put that in the show notes when we upload the show. But hey,
I know you like Redbreast.
Redbreast, that's the one. I ran out of room on my liquor shelf, and so all of my Irish whiskeys are sitting on top of the kegerator. And unfortunately, that particular bottle, Redbreast, is sitting behind the Green Spot bottle. But it's good stuff. I really like it. And of course, Ryan, you kind of turned me on to the whole Scotch and Irish whiskey thing anyway, basically mostly the Scotch, but this is really good stuff. It's really smooth, nice aroma. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about it. I highly encourage, if you're into Irish whiskeys, Green Spot. It's good stuff. Jeff, what is it tonight in your cup?
So, in typical Mead House fashion, 2 drinks tonight. One of them is one of my own. One of them is a commercial endeavor. The one of my own is it's another tall mug of my wife's. The one I made for my wife. That's a Hellesbach Braggot that I made for her birthday party. I want to say about 2 years ago now. It is malty as all get out. It's aged remarkably well. It's got a kind of a little sweetness playing between the malt and the honey, which is real nice. A little bit of caramel character to it too. I intended it to be like more of a Hellesbach than a dark Bach, but between using some of the malt extracts and the honey, the color got away from me, and it's a fairly medium brown. It's really, really good. I'm really enjoying it. A lot of the pop character, such as there was, has pretty much gone at this point. It's 2 years. It's pushing 2 years, so that's kind of to be expected. But still really enjoyable. I've got a pretty good level of carbonation on it, so it's a real easy-going, nice, malty drink. My other hand is, I wanted to get something from the liquor store yesterday for St. Patrick's Day, And local liquor store next to me is their selection could be better. My choices were down to 2 items, obviously Guinness, and then the one I settled on, which was Magner's Irish Cider.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So, hard choice. So yeah, I think JD has talked about this enough that Magner should be sponsoring the show at this point. But yeah, just a nice, easygoing, crisp, a lot of apple character, a little bit of sweetness, just enough. But still finishes pretty dry. So yeah, good second choice.
It drinks like I like real light lagers in the summertime. With nice hop character. And that reminds me, Magners reminds me that I could drink a 6-pack in no time flat. I mean, it's one of those beverages that, you put in an ice chest and you just, as soon as you empty one, you go get another one. That's how much I like that Magners. To me, that's like by far the best cider that I've ever had.
Yeah.
Good stuff, Jeff. Ryan, the bunker, what'd you call it? The brew bunker?
I should give some context to that, shouldn't I?
Yeah. And then tell us what's in your cup.
Sure. So, what's in my cup? We'll start there. I'm drinking a session Pyman tonight. This is one that I've talked about on the show. It's one that Jeff has had, JD's had. It is a Cabernet Sauvignon Pyman that was made, I don't remember the honey varietal, probably orange blossom, maybe clover, and it was just done to session strength. So it's wine cooler inspired, you might say, in that it's it's 8-9% somewhere in there. It's meant to kind of be a crushable summer or anytime easy drinker. So, and that's what I'm drinking. I put it in my old college drinking cup, big like 25 or 30 gallon mug with my alma mater's logo on it, and drinking it cold, and it's delicious.
It's not carbonated, right?
It is not carbonated. No, it is still. Carbonated, I think you could carbonate it. I think it'd be good carbonated, but this was bottled still.
Well, you mentioned wine cooler, and wine coolers back in the day when I was younger. I mean, hell, we're talking like 50 years ago now. You took a bottle of wine, put it in a punch bowl, and poured 7-Up, seltzer water, or whatever. And, maybe a couple of lemon slices or whatever, orange slices, and you dipped it out. I mean, it had some kind of a carbonation to it. So you suppose that would work with your Pyman?
Yeah, so like a sangria, basically.
Yeah, something like that.
I think that if you were to do use this session, so I make different party punches and sangrias and things like that in the summers. With this one, you'd want to fortify it, because if you're adding fruit and juices and things like that, you'd want to probably throw in some like clear rum or something, or else you're gonna be down to like a 4% alcohol punch. And if that's what you want, great. But because it's already pretty low alcohol, you might want to back it up with some clear rum or something like that, just to punch it up. Otherwise, when I do make my sangrias, and I told everybody that's one of the ways I get rid of my not so great meats, is I make them into summer sangrias. If you're making one that might be like a 15%er, then I don't feel the need to back it up with some clear rum or something. Then you can add your fruits and juices in a bottle of seltzer or something, and you probably end up with a 8%, 9% sangria drink anyway.
Yeah. Well, sounds good.
Yeah. So the brew bunker.
The brew bunker.
So people are reacting in different ways given the news, and maybe we should back up. Do we say Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody? Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
You know, the luck of the Irish be with you. You know, people are acting in a lot of different ways right now. You know, you go to social media, you watch the news, you'll see people making runs on different products, and different supermarkets are out of different things, and all of that. And it got me thinking about, let's just pretend there was a prolonged situation out there. What could I do with what I have in the brew bunker? And this isn't turning into a segment or anything, but it was kind of funny. I mean, you know, if you've got your stores and stores, I mean, your stockpiles of, you know, honeys and malts and you know, whatever you're making, you know, you're brewing your beer, you're making your mead, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
you've got a lot there. You know, we are in the season of Lent, and you know, a couple of weeks ago, all of the homebrew forums would have, you know, articles about how different medieval monks would go on beer fasts, you know, over Lent, and they would just sustain themselves by drinking these heavy beers for about 40 days. And sure, you know, you could do that. You could definitely brew some heavy braggots and heavy meads and beers and sustain yourself for a very prolonged period of time. But I was thinking of, you know, what could you do? Like JD, you know, he said he kind of needs to watch his beer intake right now. Or if you got kids in the house, like me and Jeff, you know, what could you do? And I said, well, I could probably turn this dry malt extract, even the liquid malt extract, into bread. You know, I've got yeast, so I've got you know, yeast that I can either harvest from the bottom of a bottle conditioned, you know, bottle, or open a sachet of yeast, and I could brew some bread out of the malt extract, and I could put honey on it, and I'd be able to sustain myself for, you know, my family for probably quite a while. So I just called that the brew bunker. You know, if you were in bunker mentality, you know, what could you make to sustain your family on out of your brewing ingredients? And,
no kidding.
And I kind of, after taking stock here with some buckets of honey and some sacks of malt, I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah, I mean, malt has been used in bread baking for a long time. I mean, there's some commercial bakeries out there that use malt in their recipes. So I haven't tried it yet. I've used the spent grains. Not a real big fan of that. The one thing about the spent grains that I wish, I mean, I'm out of the bread baking business now, except for on a special occasion because I'm not supposed to eat bread. And the one thing that I wished I had was a flour grinder, because I would take those spent grains and dry them in my dehydrator and then grind them down to a flour and use them like that. I'm not real big on real heavy textured bread. And unfortunately, I didn't experiment enough with, you know, putting my spent grains in bread enough to really come up with a decent recipe to where the texture was came out a little bit better. But good point. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you know, so I was talking about malts there, which is going to dovetail perfectly into what we want to talk about at the top of our show here. We want to talk about malts. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about the Iron B. I just want to give a quick update on the Iron B.
Right.
And first of all, I want to let everybody know the Iron B is taking place as scheduled. And what you'll notice, what's scheduled is the shipping window, you know, and the entry window. The entry window has not changed. The shipping window has not changed. We've made arrangements to really make sure that the only thing that's still in flux right now is when we're going to do the award ceremony and the party. We are going to do an award ceremony. We're going to do a big party like we did last time, even bigger than we did last time. and that's the only thing that has we're deliberately not talking about the date because we want to just make sure everything wait for everything to happen where we can do that. But in the interim, if you've already entered, you probably got your ingredients. You can be making your mead. You might even have more time right now to make your mead if you're working from home. I might see some names pop up called like quarantine braggot or self-isolation secret ingredient mead. But you probably get even more time than now to play around with those ingredients and make those and shipping them in as usual. I know that some other competitions have had to postpone a little bit because of the nature of ours. We have not had to do that, and so it is again just keep making your meads. Send them in as per the instructions. That is all going on. The only thing we're gonna try to figure out here is how we can best do a really grand award ceremony and a really great party. Again, we've got a couple of groups that have done the Bragging Rights Challenge. We still have some spots left open for others. So if you are part of a homebrew club, formal or informal, so what I mean by formal is typically the homebrew clubs that are registered with the American Homebrew Association, that kind of thing, or if it's informal, maybe more of like a Facebook club or a Reddit group that you chat with, and those are the guys gals that you learn from. You guys can register as a club, and what I mean by that is you register individually. You create your own entries, but you tell us that, send us an email, let us know that at least 5 people in your club are signed up, and what we're going to do is we're going to call that send you guys and the winner of your club an extra little award, kind of a bragging right challenge to who is the top mead maker in that homebrew club. So do that. We still have some spots open, and Jeff can get those out very quickly, those ingredients. So please do that. And we're going to make this just an absolute unbelievable Iron B. Jeff, as always, your best color man in the business. What do you have to add?
You pretty much covered all the bases. We have been getting some questions regarding, postponement and things like that. And again, as Ryan said, this, the way that we are structuring this is kind of working out in our favor. So things are going ahead as planned. And, everyone, to my knowledge, apart from a couple of the most recent entries, should have their stuff. I've gotten some questions. Again, just to reiterate, this has come up a couple times, and I'll probably be sending an email to participants. You've gotten a big package with a lot of great ingredients from 2 of our sponsors, the Mountain Rose Herbs and Yakima Chief. That secret ingredient from Mountain Rose Herbs is the only one you need to use in the secret ingredient category. The hops are strictly just for funsies, for your braggot or for your own inspiration to play with afterwards. You've got so many hops in there, I doubt anybody's going to use them in a single braggot, but you guys may prove me wrong. So we'll see.
Yeah, and Jeff, thank you for saying that. I've gotten those questions too. Please, maybe just send an email out to everybody. I've gotten a couple of those questions about that. The secret ingredient is the Mountain Rose Herbs ingredient is the only one that you have to use as secret ingredient. The Yakima Chief hops that we've selected to send you are to inspire your braggot making, and those hops do not need to be used in the braggot. However, they could be used in the braggot. They could be used in the secret ingredient category. They could be used in something else. But they're just there to inspire you. And then I got a couple of questions too, and Jeff, make sure to include this in the email, that even if people only registered for one of the categories, you were automatically entered into both. So that's the way this competition works again, is that you enter, everybody gets 2 entries. You get 1 entry into secret ingredient, 1 entry into braggot, and you get the 2 entries for the price of none. And what I mean by that is if when you're a member of the Keelder Club, this is a Keelder competition, and entries are free beyond your being a member of the Keelder Club. So I got a couple of questions about that as well. Somebody said, I only signed up for 1, and it's kind of weird. I went back and I was registered for 2. So we'll just make sure that everybody knows that as well.
Further point of clarity there.
The IRB is going to be absolutely fantastic. And Jeff, anything to add?
Yeah, just one further point of clarification there. If for whatever reason we really want you guys to participate in both categories, but let's say you make your first bracket and it's just kind of meh, you don't think it's going to go so well, you are not going to be penalized in the secret ingredient category for not sending us a bracket, or in the bracket category for not sending us a secret ingredient. If you only have one entry that you feel strongly could do well in this, and you only want to send 1 entry, that's fine. We do want everybody to try and participate in both, but we're not going to force it.
I'll go one step further. If you make your bracket or your secret ingredient, you think it's only okay, send it in anyway. You'd be surprised. You might be surprised. I would say don't worry if, for example, something more extreme happens, like you ding your glass carboy and it shatters and you lose the whole batch.
Yeah, that
don't
does
worry
happen.
About sending only one of them in. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, everybody's in the same boat. You are always your own harshest critic. If you make a batch and you think it's only okay, send it in anyway. You might be surprised. There were a few people last year that did very well, that were like, oh my gosh, I was a bit surprised, and it's always because you are your own harshest critic, and you're dealing with ingredients you usually don't deal with, and you've got a very short amount of time to do it. That's what makes this competition special. So just kind of get it in your head that you're going to make a batch with what you've got, the time you have, you're going to send it in, and everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah, we kind of like to keep things a little simple around here at the Mead House. We don't get real carried away with a whole lot of things around here. It's easier for us to just sit around a table and yak about making meads and enjoying one at the same time. Thanks, guys. Iron B, I'm really looking forward to it, although I won't be there. This whole coronavirus thing has put a damper on all of my travel plans. So we're not going to be traveling anywhere except for to the store and back. I might even have my food delivered to me. Funny thing, my wife and I went to the store the other day. Friday. We usually do our grocery shopping on Friday morning or Saturday morning. So we get there Friday morning. It's like 20 minutes to find a parking spot. It's like, what the hell's going on here? It didn't dawn on me, this whole coronavirus thing. So we get up in a store and the shelves are like empty. But there's a couple of things that I noticed while shopping that I thought was really strange. When I made I've got this chili recipe that I've been working on. I made another pot of chili last week. So I'm looking for red kidney beans, okay, and some diced tomatoes. So go down the bean and rice aisle, and there's like hardly any canned goods left on the shelf. I was lucky enough to find a can of red kidney beans. But while I was looking, while all the canned goods were gone, all of the dry goods were still on the shelf. I'm thinking, okay, I know what's up now. I mean, if you were starving to death, wouldn't you want to take all of the dry goods with you? I mean, that was the first thing I thought was pretty unusual. And then, a trip down the water and juice aisle for my juice, all the water's gone. And I told Raven, my wife, I said, was the tap water still on this morning? I mean, people are hoarding bottled water for some unknown reason, yet I'll bet their tap water still works. Anyway, a couple of observations that I made I thought was kind of funny. So malts, pardon us for talking a lot about braggots. That's kind of what we do here. We do talk a little bit about other categories of meads on occasion, but there's a method to our madness here at the Mead House. Braggot is a category, a BJCP category that is not often talked about, and it's not often people don't make a lot of braggots to send into competition. So we're trying to fix that a little bit. And it happens to be my favorite style of mead over any other, although I've had some very good, melomels and what have you. Pyment's, the one Pyment that I've had one from Ryan, which was just simply awesome. So we talk a lot about braggots, and one of the main components in making a braggot, Ryan and Jeff, of course, is the malt. We've gone off the deep end talking about the harmonious blend. I think everybody gets it now. If look it up on the BJCP website. What is it, Jeff? 34C or something like that? 34A? I don't know. I don't remember what it was.
It's one of the. I want to say it's one of the M3 categories.
M3 category, and you'll find a very good explanation as to what a braggot is. What it is not is 50% of one and 50% of the other. It just has to have that maltiness to it that represents a beer. So, Ryan, actually, let's go with Jeff. Selecting a malt for a braggot. Now, the malts, we're talking about the base malt here. We're talking about the dry malt extract. We're talking about the liquid malt extract. I think that's probably where you would want to start.
Well, yeah.
Well, go ahead. I'll let you go.
Yeah, the base malt is going to be, at least as far as your grain component is concerned, that's where you're going to get the bulk of your fermentable sugars from. And that's going to make up the bulk of the grain bill from a regular beer. There's a bunch of different ways you can approach a braggot, and in making a braggot, you may decide to do something sessionable that has just specialty grains and no base malts. And I think we talked about that a couple episodes back. That seems like a perfectly valid approach to a braggot as well. So as far as base malts go, you got a few different selections here, and we could talk about the DMEs and the LMEs, malt extracts, things like that. But generally, your base malts fall into a few different categories. You've got Pilsen malts, which are very, very light. There's several different varieties, or I guess localities for those available. There's some from Germany, Belgium. I've got a big bag of Canadian Pilsen malt that is it's just staring at me, waiting for me to do something with it here. There's pale malts, which are a little bit darker, but still fairly light. These are the kind of things that go into ales, and the pale malts kind of fall into a bunch of different categories and a bunch of different locations. You've got the lighter pales, and they tend to be a little more grainy than a Pilsen, but not quite as strong. And then there are a couple of British pale malts that I'm just really, really fond of. One of them is called Maris Otter. It's more of kind of an old-fashioned style of malt, in that there's a lot of sugars that wind up being difficult to convert, so you end up with just a little bit more residual sugar with that. And you'll typically see this one in the stouts and the porters and things like that. The other one that I'm really fond of, and it's a little bit lighter in color, but it's still got a lot of flavor, a lot of really good grainy texture, is Golden Promise. Both of them are British in origin. Your local homebrew store should carry both of them, and you see both of these used in what they call the smash beers, the single hop, single malt, single hop. That's it. Just because by themselves, they've got a lot of grain character. They've got a lot of really interesting flavor character. So if you're kind of new to braggots, I would try those out, check those out, and see if something in there seems like it would be a good match for kind of the bulk of where you're wanting your sugars to come from.
And matching up Of course, along with that is your honey selection too.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if there's. I know a lot of these malts have, they offer different flavors, and they talk about the Lovibond, the color of the malt has to do with the color of the malt. I think I don't know a lot about the malting process, but I believe the darker the color, the longer it's cooked, from what I understand. Or
yes, that's in very simple terms. Yeah, the longer it's been cooked or it's been kind of charred, toasted, whatever term you want to use there, and the end result may vary to that degree.
Yeah.
Some of these Pilsen malts have hardly been they've hardly had much done to them at all. They've basically, in the malting process, what they do is they get these grains wet and they let them sprout. And when they let them sprout like that, that's turning some of that sugary goodness that's supposed to help this stalk of barley or what have you thrive until it takes root and gets all its nutrients from the soil. And then after it's started to sprout, they dry and heat it to get the base malt. So that way, all that sugar is kind of like sort of unlocked, and it just needs some of the enzymes that are present on the surface of the grain during your mashing process, as they call it, to unlock those and turn those into fermentable sugars.
Yeah.
I hope that's a simple explanation.
Well, yeah, simple enough for me. I choose my malt, based on the type of flavor I'm looking for, and what I'm making.
Sure.
One of the projects that I want to talk about here later on in segment 2 is in honor of St. Patrick's Day. I was looking at a couple of different things. One is a porter type braggot using some darker malts and some darker grains. And then the other one is this kind of a Scotch ale. Yeah, I know it's Scotch. Big deal. Come on, they're like writing. Yeah. I mean, give me a break. All right. If you can pick out the accent from a Scottish person and an Irish person, have at it. But anyway, so a couple of projects that I'm working on. So and the malt is going to be a huge component along with the honey. So I want to be able to get the right malt. Ryan, you and I both went out and bought 50 pounds of the Pilsen malt. I've got it in a big plastic storage, airtight storage container like you. And that's my base for just about everything I do. But I want to branch out. Okay, I want to go a little bit beyond the Pilsen Light. Now, I love the Pilsen Light because it makes a really nice light, sessionable, like you make braggots, and it's a quick recipe. Is the Ryan braggot, 3 pounds of this, 3 pounds of that. Add your flavorings, your hops, and you're good to go. When you select malts for your braggots, what are you thinking about as far as the recipe goes? I mean, do you malt your braggots up according to what your recipe calls for, or are you strictly a Pilsen Light user?
Well, yeah, without boring our regular listeners and with rehashing something I'm going to say, or something I said before and saying it again, I just want to touch on that, and I want to go in a different direction. So yeah, the reason that I love Pilsen is that it is the blankest canvas that you can find, right? So if you're going to be an artist, you want to start with the cleanest canvas you can get, and then start painting on it. And Pilsen for me is that. I know some guys like 2-row, some guys like 6-row, whatever. But I just, for me, Pilsen is that blank canvas, and then I can do some other grains if I want to give it that color and texture and feel. Now, with that, I said I like doing other things too. I more on the liquid malt side of extract. You want quick braggots, you can get Vienna malt. You can get Munich malt. You can get Maris Otter. Maris Otter is great. I'm a huge fan of Maris Otter. Also, I really like Vienna. They've got some different qualities. Go to your favorite local homebrew store and website and read about them, or wherever you buy your stuff, and you can kind of read the different flavor notes. Some might be more biscuity or bready or things like that. But I like those. So you can do Maris Otter, you can do Munich, you can do Vienna, some of those different ones. I stay away from the ones that say like dark malt extract or things like that, because generally, if you look at the breakdown, the ingredients on those, they're adding in those dark grains for you, and I want to add my own. I want to decide if I want chocolate or pale chocolate or midnight wheat or black prince or whatever I want to add to get it there. So I stay away from some of those. But where I wanted to go was more along the lines of what I've said some of that before. But where I wanted to go tonight was something that Jeff had mentioned. What if you wanted to create a braggot just by steeping grains?
Yeah.
Because again, all we're talking about here with braggots, especially the Iron V braggot, is could you talk me into saying that this is beer like and mead like, or it's got some qualities of both? We're not judging against the style or judging against anything other than that. So, what if you wanted to take some smoked malt? I know JD, you're going to talk about your Scotch ale braggot or Scotch ale next, but what if you wanted to take a pound, maybe 2 pounds of cherrywood smoked malt and just kind of cold steep that overnight, or maybe hot steep it, and then pull that out and just boil it just to make sure you knock off any of the breath that's hanging out on those malts and those malt pins, and then add your honey or not. Maybe you just steep it. Maybe you want to go wild. You want to go wild and crazy, and you steep those grains cold. And then you mix in your honey and you let it wild ferment. That'd be pretty interesting. So I think that, or what if you wanted to add a little more body structure to it? You did that. Maybe you tried some oats, some flaked oats, or you did some wheat, or something like that. Or maybe you took your favorite caramel malt. You got like a really excessive amount of caramel malt. Like maybe 3 pounds of a caramel malt, and you just steeped it for, took a bucket of water and a brew bag and you just steeped it for like 24 hours. Then you pulled it out, boiled it or not, added some honey, and then let it rip and got some flavors that way. That is where I think some of the really interesting braggots can come from that you can't achieve in beer. Or you can. I'm not saying you couldn't, but in our way of brewing, things are going to be a little bit different. So that's what I'm thinking about right now is not the Ryan braggot, not the 3 pounds of this, 3 pounds of that.
Yeah.
Maybe some cool hops and you let it go. But what if you wanted to say, hey, this is where I'm going to get 2 pounds of 2 pounds or 3 pounds of cherrywood smoked malt and a pound of wheat and 3 pounds of caramel 60, and you just put that all in a bag. You threw it in a 5 pound or 5 gallon bucket of water, some good clean or good cold water, and you just put the lid on it, let it sit for 24, 36 hours. Pulled that bag out, squeeze the heck out of it. You're not going to pull tannins out. Don't worry about it. You squeeze the heck out of it. Then you add, maybe 4 pounds of honey, 5 pounds of honey, 6 pounds of honey.
We're talking room temperature water, right?
Yeah, room temperature water. You cold steep like that, and then you added 6 pounds of honey, and you just kind of let the wild ferment happen. and see what happens. And if it doesn't kick up, right away on you, maybe you pitch some beer yeast pitch some beer yeast or something. But doing something like that, I think that would be really, really interesting, and you'd come up with some really unique braggot flavors. So again,
I'm gonna throw two really quick notes here.
I apologize for any of our feline friendly listeners, but there's a lot of ways to skin this cat.
Yeah.
Ryan, I want to throw just one little quick note. There's a couple other ingredients that I would throw in there. If you guys have listened to the episodes with Josh Mahoney, I think he hit on adding like a quarter to a half a pound of honey malt, which is great for bringing up the honey flavor and aroma. With honey making the backbone of the fermentable sugars, it might not be necessary in this case. But I put probably about a half a pound of honey malt into basically every braggot I make, just to bump that up a little bit further. The other one I would strongly consider, especially in this regard, is throw in about a half a pound of either Carapils or Carafoam, which are dextrin malts. And the reasoning behind that is, if we're making a braggot, it's really nice to have that beer-like head. Without a big grain bill, you're not as likely to have the protein structures that are going to make that durable, lasting head on top of your beer. Dextrin malts like this help promote that. They help give you a thicker, fuller head. And so, adding something like that would be a good cheat to help your presentation when you're pouring from, bottle to glass or, pouring out of a keg. You get that nice head and it'll hang around for a little while. Otherwise, if you've tried carbonating just a still mead or something like that, that head can show up for a little bit and then it really quickly dissipates.
Yep. Does the same thing in ciders.
Oh yeah.
Jeff, when we're talking about steeping grains here, and Ryan he's really hit on something, because wasn't it? I'm going back through some of the older notes here. I think it was either last week or a couple of weeks ago. Wasn't it? The guy's name was John, I think.
Yep.
He did a braggot that was. He didn't use any base malt. He just used steeped grains. So, and steeped, grains, specialty grains is what he used. So, and they run the gamut too. Okay.
Oh yeah.
When just dealing with the caramel malts, which are some of my favorite. You're talking about going from a 10L all the way up to about a 120L. Which is on the darker side of the house. So, can you explain that a little bit? How that selection might impact the braggot that you're about to make?
Yeah. Well, and here's a tip that is, if you're new to grain and you're new to malting, you may go to your homebrew store and they may carry crystal malt or they may carry caramel malt. It's the same thing. One of the terms, I forget exactly which, is a kind of a trademark kind of a thing from one particular malting company. But it's the same idea. Basically, in the malting process, they're letting some of the starches and things like that kind of get some of the Maillard reactions going on. It takes on a caramel kind of a character to it. And when you're talking about these numbers here, like the caramel or the Crystal 10, the Crystal 120, that's that same Lovibond scale of color that we were talking about with the base grains. Base grains can go from like 1.5 to maybe like 3 or 4 on the darker ones, because generally they kind of leave those alone. They just let it dry out to the point where it's stable, shelf stable, and get a little color to it. These caramel malts have been they've been heated a little bit further, and they get some caramel tones to them. You'll get some biscuity notes as well. Generally, the darker you go, you might get a little bit of bitterness to it, especially in that 120. So I like to, when it comes to helping people build out a grain bill for a beer, if they're going for something very light, I'll suggest 3 to 5% of your grain bill being in that like caramel 15, caramel 30 range, just to give you a little extra something. It adds a little interest, even to a Pilsner. You get a little extra flavor, a little extra, just something that broadens out that flavor profile. honestly, a lot of the time when I see the 120 being used, we're talking about stouts or porters where, there's going to be a lot of other dark grains, but you get some of the caramel flavors, some of the bready notes there that, you'll get like a little bit of a kind of just a toast character, honestly, that's really nice. And it suits those flavors well. Beyond that, there's kind of some adjacent ones, and Munich, I think, is it kind of toes the line between the crystals and the base malts, because you don't generally use Munich as your one and only grain, except in a few circumstances.
Yeah.
But you use quite a bit of it when you're using it as a steeping grain or as a specialty grain, and that's because it has a lot of sugar to contribute, but it also has a lot of that caramel flavor to it that you like. The Oktoberfest Marzen style is very characteristic of this. You get a lot of malty character out of it, so it's very nice like that. And geez, we could go through the gamut of just a ton of other ones, but
well, I want to go. I want to point it back over to Ryan's direction here because there's another set of malts that can be used. I don't know that you'd want to use them specifically for your main. I mean, they're not the kind of grain where you would want to put, maybe 2 pounds of Crystal 30, in a steeping situation for 36 hours. But the roasted, the roasted malts, a little darker roasted malts. I'm talking, some of the other specialty malts like the ryes and the barleys, and I mean they're referred to as the chocolates and the dark malts, black malts, that kind of thing, Ryan, or grains. Those are not the type of grains that you want to base you don't want to use them as a base grain, right? I mean, those are like adjuncts. Those are like adding different flavors. One of my favorite, when I do my Scotch deal here in a minute, I'll talk about that here in a minute, is the peated malt. And we'll get into that here in a minute. But your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah,
chocolate malt is another common one too.
So what I'm talking about is if you are going to do, if you're looking for fermentable sugars, from your malt, and you're gonna use a lot of the malt. That's where we talked about that's what I was talking about, the Pilsen, or maybe the Munich, or maybe the Vienna, or the Marisot, or things like that. When I was talking just a few minutes ago about doing the steeping, you're getting negligible points of gravity. I mean, you will get some. There was a nice article or a seminar at HomebrewCon a handful of years ago about that cold steeping does in fact extract some fermentable sugars at some gravity points, even though you're doing it at room temperature versus the 150 or something. But where I'm going with that is you absolutely could say, I really like the character I get from Caramel 40. And I am going to do 3 pounds of Caramel 40, and that's the only grain that I'm going to use. And then I'm going to get virtually all of my fermentable sugars from honey. But because I steeped, I've still got some of that essence from that Caramel 40, and it's going to present like a braggot. So sure, I would say definitely could. This is what I mean by these are things that you don't necessarily do with a beer, that you can do in a braggot. Is you can do that sort of thing. So yeah, I would say that if you're going to go about it the steeping only method, maybe we'll call it that, steeping only, you could take a really weird adjunct like peated malt and have that be the only grain that you use. Or what, when I'm doing the typical Ryan braggot, no, I'm looking for about half the gravity points or so coming from the Pilsen malt. So I wouldn't, treat it the same way, try to do a mini mash or something, with just all specialty grains. But I'm glad you brought that up, JD, because I think that for somebody who's not quite as familiar with the beer brewing side or the braggot brewing side, that was a good call out to make sure that we were all speaking the same language.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole set of dark roasted grains, specialty grains that, I mean, I'm not throwing, 4 pounds of chocolate malt into a bag and letting it sit for 24 hours. That's going to be kind of overkill. In fact, I'm not even quite sure what you even come up with. But these are malts that I treat them as adjuncts, actually. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking for a particular character, Jeff, in my braggot, one of the recipes that I'm going to be focusing on is a stout style braggot. And it does call for some of the darker grains during the steeping process. Although, I mean, this is a dry malt extract, and like Ryan, I use the Pilsen malt, and then with the honey actually goes in during fermentation at high Krausen or just afterwards. Even in steps, that I found I get the best honey character if I put it in steps, not all at one time, and certainly not right after the boil, after it cools down. But some of the steeping grains I want to use are like United Kingdom brown, it's 65L,
sure.
And another one is American black malt, about 4 ounces of that, some American chocolate, and the Crystal 60 that Ryan likes. That's the base of my recipe for this porter style malt. And it'll people might say, well, you're not using any Crystal 120. Well, no, I'm not. I don't want those characters that the 120 gives. I want more chocolatey, more roasty type flavors out of it. So, am I going down the right road here?
I mean, it sounds like it. The thing to understand about the specialty grains is that these are very, very strongly flavored grains. So, like you were saying with I can't remember if it was the chocolate malt or the black malt, but you're talking about using 4 ounces, a quarter pound of that.
Yeah.
That's for a 5-gallon batch. That is really all you need. It's just a very small amount. If you're going to do an all-grain batch, we're talking generally in the neighborhood of about, let's say, 10 pounds of base malt and anywhere from 1 pound or 2 pounds of your specialty malts, depending on what you're going for. The specialty malts for a stout or a porter that are darker and going to have a lot more character to them, you're going to have a little bit more than you would for, I don't know, like an English-style brown ale, for example.
Well, and then the other recipe that I was working on today is what I call the Scotch Ale Ryan bracket. Now it's not a Scotch ale. I mean, if you've ever had a Scotch ale, please don't confuse this with a Scotch ale beer. This is a braggot. It's Scotch Ale. So, I'm not sure how to break that down any further. But this particular recipe, again with the Pilsen dry malt extract in the boil, and then the honey. That's actually 4 pounds. There's more honey. It's not a 50-50 here. 4 pounds of the Pilsen in a boil, 60-minute boil because of the Northern Brewer hops that I want to use. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But 5 pounds of honey. And that honey, again, that's a late edition honey. It doesn't go in like right after. I don't wait until it cools to 100 degrees and then put the honey in. This actually goes in when I hit high Krausen, and then it's step fed, maybe 1.5 pounds at a time. I may do, 2 or 3 different feedings. until I get all of my 5 pounds in there. And again, I feel I get the best honey character. But steeping grains, specialty grains, we're looking at roasted barley, just a small amount, 3 ounces, and some peated malt, about 5 ounces of peated malt. Now you kind of got to be careful with that one, because that's one that can easily get away from you. And I made a batch of a Scotch type braggot ale here. Oh gosh, it's been probably 5 or 6 months ago now, and I only put 4 ounces in, and I didn't, for my own liking, I wasn't quite happy with it, so I upped it to 5 for this particular recipe, and then just about 3/4 of a pound of the, again, that Crystal 60. I love that Crystal 60. And we're going to go with those grains and malt for this particular braggot. So, the peated malts. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
How they, I mean, we're all familiar with all the crystals and the chocolates and everything else, but the peated malt is something, kind of a thing all in its own category almost.
A little bit, and what they're trying to accomplish is the same way that they would malt the grain bill for like a Scotch, the actual whiskey Scotch, wherein what they're using to heat that grain that they are malting is not like gas or wood or whatever source of heat you would use in modern times. They're actually using peat as a fuel source. So they're burning that, and you get a lot of that peat smoke with it that kind of just impregnates itself into the grains. You get a very strong peaty kind of, it just smells like a Scotch barrel when you open it up. Yeah. So this is, again, one of those that, 1/4, maybe a 1/2 pound if you're really into it. But you want to be judicious with it. A little goes a long way. It adds some really good character. And generally, if I'm going to use a peat malt in a braggot or a beer, I'm going to throw some smoked malt in there too, just because they're very complementary in terms of flavor, and you get a little bit more depth out of both that way.
Yeah. For St. Patrick's Day, Ryan, tossing around a few ideas here. How would you go about putting together let's say a red ale, which is very, very Irish, a red ale inspired braggot? Where do you think you'd go with that?
It's something I hadn't given a lot of thought to. I hadn't given a ton of it, but I do like red ales, and what I would do, I think, is I'm breathing heavily because it's almost sacrilege to say that you'd want to use an English malt in an Irish ale. But I might start, because we're not going to get the same body from a beer where you're using just the malt.
Right, yeah.
I would probably use Maris Otter, because Maris Otter as the base malt gives it some stronger body than just the Pilsen or the two-row.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would add probably a little bit of Munich, a little bit of rye, and just a pinch of roasted barley. And I like the rye. I'm a rye guy.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my nicknames growing up. Ryan, rye.
Right.
But rye guy. But I'm a rye guy. I like finding ways to sneak in rye when I can. So I would do a little bit of that. I'd probably put, start with Maris Otter, a little bit of Munich, a little bit of rye, a little pinch of roasted barley, just for some depth. And then I'd probably use Old World hops. So I'm thinking something here like Fuggles, probably I'd go with. and then I do an Irish ale yeast, and then again at that high krausen, I'd probably add. I'm almost tempted to say I want this to not be run of the mill. I want it to stand out.
Yeah.
So I might even go Western buckwheat with the honey, or at least a portion of the honey is Western buckwheat. Not talking about the super funky English buckwheat, Eastern buckwheat. The eastern part of the country, the buckwheat is very like barnyardy, funky, horse blanket, that kind of thing.
Animal droppings.
In the western part of the country, it's a little more earthy.
Yeah.
Is the main character. Not so funky, or more earthy. So I might try to find some Western buckwheat honey and add that, and just kind of give it some more pizzazz and some more depth that way.
Yeah.
That's the way I'd think about throwing it together.
Actually sounds pretty
somebody
good.
was trying to chime in. That might have been Jeff.
Yeah, I want to get some ideas from Jeff.
Sure.
Talking about St. Patrick's Day here, dude. No, we're not talking green braggots per se.
So, we could throw it back to Jessica from our last episode and get a lot of chlorophyll in here for a true green braggot, but I don't think we want to go that route here.
No.
As far as like an Irish red, I gotta go with Ryan and say that I would go with a British base malt, and in this case, I might tend more toward Golden Promise just because it's a little lighter. And you'll see why I'm trying to make up the difference. I would actually lean kind of heavy on the Munich malt. There's a couple different varieties of that Munich. The lighter Munich tends to be the one we want to go for here, and that's where we're going to get a lot of red from. So I might, like I said before, that Munich kind of straddles the line between the base malt and the specialty malt. In this case, I might go as high as like 3 or 4 pounds of Munich, just because I want a lot of that reddish color from it. There are a couple other options. There's a Cara Munich, which is like, it's caramelized Munich, essentially. They've taken the Munich process and let it caramelize a little bit, and it turns into like a 30-ish, 40-ish Lovibond, but it's got some of the Munich character as well. So
pretty rich flavor too, I understand.
Yeah. I'd use just a little bit of that, maybe a quarter to a half a pound.
Yeah.
Then I like the idea of having just a little bit of roast in there, maybe a quarter pound of that. You could use a chocolate malt instead, but these are going to add some darker colors to it. And again, Fuggles, I think, is a great choice for a hop. Another one I would look for in this classic, the United Kingdom Isles tradition is the East Kent Goldings, especially as like a late aroma addition. Just a really nice classic, that British Isles smell to it.
Yeah.
The honey selection here is where I'm going to differ a little bit, and I would almost love to see, especially with the lighter grain selection ahead of time, an avocado honey added into this.
Oh yeah,
some of that malty character at play with the caramel from the Munich and the Cara Munich, along with those hops. I think that could be real good.
Yeah, that sounds good. Actually, from both of you, and I'm kind of eager to get started on my own little, it's kind of a quasi St. Patrick's Day brews. Although, I guess there are some Irish porters out there, but my Scotch one is certainly not. But anyway, Ryan, last thoughts before we move on here.
The Emerald Isle is full of wonderful inspiration to take from. I mean, we talked about the Irish Red, the Irish Dry Stout, the Irish Cider, even just the straight traditional, Irish mead. So, again, if you're at home this week, and let's when I was a younger lad, we dedicate the whole week to St. Patrick's Day, St. Patrick's Week. And if you're at home at all, if you're working from home, if you're quarantined, if you're trying to say safe distance away from the rest of humanity. Throw together an Irish themed, brew this week. Let's brag it, cider, beer, mead, whatever it might be, and let us know. We'd love to hear what you're making and give it a shout out on the next episode.
Absolutely. This whole show it's all about, inspiration, and, none of us here are experts, but we all have varying degrees of experience, and, we're hoping that some of the discussions that we have here at the house are inspirational to our listeners out there. So,
well, the parting thought on that too is, I think the last thing you can do is if you really just want to do the poor man's, Irish mead, okay, take a trad, take a bottle of Jameson, pour them together.
Yeah. Isn't that cheating, Jeff? Go ahead.
That's a cocktail, and that sounds great. I'm not going to say that's cheating. That sounds great. Hey, a parting thought, a little bit broader thought from what Ryan was saying. A lot of us have a lot of extra time now, and maybe a bunch of our listeners, and maybe even some of our Iron Beacon contestants that haven't done very much in terms of bracket. Suddenly, you've got a lot of free time, and I can't speak for every homebrew store, but for example, the one I work at, you can give us a call and say, "Hey, this is the grain bill I'd like." They'll have it ready for you to pick up. So, the grains, as far as I know, homebrew stores, most places, still open. You can keep your social distance by just having that ready to go. You run the card when you get there and get the heck out, and everybody's happy. So if you've not given a bracket a try, this is a great time to do it.
And I'll bet the shelves are stocked, well stocked.
We're not carrying toilet paper, so,
what Jeff and I just talked about here, and JD also weighing in. And what's great about the mead house here is you got three guys with four opinions.
Yep. Yeah, there you go. Hey, that's what works well here at the mead house for damn sure. As I pour myself another little bit of, I got to be careful. I'm not supposed to be drinking all this stuff. But anyway, this green spot is really good. Ryan, catching up with this stout thing, nothing's changed. I still get a lot of roastiness on the aroma. I don't get any. I'm searching for the honey. I can't find it. But it still has this tartness. I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. Maybe that honey. Could you think?
I think you're getting it from the melter honey.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to think about that, but I like all the other components of it. I can taste the roasted malts in it, or the roasted grains. I like that. It's got a deep. It's got some real serious depth to it, and that I like in stouts. But moving on here, as we close out the show here, let's go to Facebook, friends. This is, of course, where we try to answer questions with no formal expertise. Want to make that clear, other than what we've experienced in our own brew house, and that's actually quite a bit. So, Facebook friends, guys, I'm going to rely on you two as usual. I just don't get around Facebook that often anymore. So let's go with Ryan.
Yeah, so a couple of these aren't so much questions, but I want to throw them out there just so people can get more inspiration. So I'm not going to read the person's name. I'm not going to read anything else. I'm just going to say what they're sharing because I hope it sparks inspiration in you.
Yeah.
And this is one that says, and again, the other reason I'm doing this is I don't know if they're in the Iron Bee or not. But one person said, making a braggot from all the leftover odds and ends I have in the cabinet. I've talked about doing the pantry clean out braggots before, and that's what this guy is doing, and he's just showing a few different ingredients, and I, it looks appetizing. I don't know what it'll be. Another one says, the newest member of my mead family, chocolate, vanilla, and coffee braggot. Mm. So he's using cacao nibs here is how he's using the chocolate in there.
Yeah.
But chocolate, vanilla, and coffee braggot, perfectly acceptable entry. I want to do now. Now I'm going to get into a question. I've got 2 braggot questions back to back. So I'm going to read. Here's the first one. We'll go around and then I'll get to the second one.
Yeah.
The first one is stinky braggot fermentation. Started brewing my first braggot, my first ever braggot, 2 days ago. The smell coming off the airlock is interesting, kind of like eggy and definitely sour smelling. Is this okay? Will it go away with time? Also, the first day of fermentation was quite vigorous, and there was a lot of foam-looking stuff in the headspace. Is that okay to leave there? Thanks for the help. So this is, a person that's never made a braggot before. I was a previous mead maker, and 2 things here: the smell coming out of the airlock, and the foam in the fermenter. I'll throw this over to Jeff and let Jeff. Why don't you take your first crack at this?
Sure. So that eggy smell that you're getting is. Did he mention by chance what yeast he's using?
Did not, but we
Okay.
can surmise.
Sure. So more likely than not, I'm going to hazard a guess and say that he's not using a lager yeast. Lager can sometimes just throw those smells as part of its fermentation. It just kind of comes with the territory there. For the most part, when you get that eggy,
Jeff,
rotten egg smell, yes.
Jeff, I apologize. I've got to cut in. He used Lalvin D47.
D47. Okay. So that's that's a standard wine yeast, white wine yeast. When you're getting that eggy smell, that's hydrogen sulfide, and that generally indicates your yeast are stressed. More often than not, that stress is coming from a lack of nutrient. And the nice thing about braggots is that the grains do provide some level of nutrient and nitrogen all by themselves. More often than not, the same rules apply for making a braggot as they do for a mead. The honey is just junk food. It doesn't have a lot of the nutrients that the yeast need to thrive. So you got to feed those guys. You got to get some ferment K or the yeast nutrient of your choice in there, just to provide that the stuff you need. More often than not, my general rule is for a braggot, if I'm doing roughly 50-50 sugars, I figure up the amount of nutrient I would need for that gravity, cut in half. If you're doing mostly honey, probably going to need more. If you're doing maybe a little bit of honey, maybe a little less. But those are good rules of thumb. As far as the foam at the top, that's I think JD referred a time or two to high Krausen or high Kreuzen, however that's pronounced. That's Kreuzen. That's just the foam from the grains, the same foam character that's going to give your beer a nice full head that I was talking about before. It's acting now. It's catching the CO2 as it's bubbling up. Totally normal. Just leave it alone. Let it settle out, and you're good to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, when Ryan was mentioning the sulfur or the egg smell, I was thinking, I think a lot of people confuse, kind of a rotten egg smell with sulfur. That's got kind of a similar aroma to it. And Jeff, you mentioned it there in your explanation. I'll buy that. And again, I mean, like you said, the 71 or the D47, that's kind of I don't want to say it's a difficult yeast, but it's a temperamental one that you kind of got to be careful with, especially around the temperature arena.
Yeah, above 68, it can throw some off flavors. It's kind of a known thing, and I'm not going to tell anybody that they made a bad choice, but I don't think it would necessarily be my first choice for a braggot. I would tend to go more for an ale yeast in that family than a wine yeast. I know plenty of people have probably made a really great yeast really great meat braggots with wine yeast, but just not my first choice.
I on the record, I have not. Every braggot that I have made with a wine yeast went down and fed the sewers of Los Angeles. and they're probably melting away by now. So, Ryan, you got another one?
Yeah. Here's one more Breguet one. So this gentleman is making a Breguet, and he does not have any experience with hop pellets. And he wants to know what the pros and cons are of the pellets, or should he try a different form of hop? I'll start off with this one. Hops do come in a lot of different forms. Maybe the four most common are the whole hops, the either fresh or dried, kind of the cone. The hop pellet, which is probably the most common. The lupulin powder, so just not even a pellet, but just straight, lupulin powder. And then lastly, the hop shot, or that's the commercial way to buy it, or extract, just a liquid version that you then pour in to your concoction. Pellets are by far probably the most common form of hop. The pros and cons of it, and then should you try something else? For making most kinds of Breguets and things like that, let me talk about the other three first. The cone hops are going to suck up a lot of your wort or must or whatever it is that you're making. I mean, they are going to grab onto these. They are going to fill up. They're going to expand, and they're going to take a lot of your mead or your Breguet or your beer with you, or cider, and you're not going to get that back. And so that's a con of that. And you're also going to get a lot of, you got to be careful with the vegetal material in there as well, leaving flavors. Mm-hmm. The lupulin powder is expensive, by, contrasting it to, it's all relative, but it's, contrasting it to the pellets. And I like using it. It is good, but, you've got to really find the value in it. And then the hop shot is good. They don't really come in a lot of the varieties, so you might want to make your own extract, and you can do that, but it's time intensive, and a lot of times when you make your own, you're starting with the pellets anyway. So the pellets are kind of where, again, they're economical. They give you the widest variety of hops, and give you the most control. And that's there's a lot more I can say about it. There's a lot more you can do with them, but in terms of the form of hop that you can use, I think that's a great place to start, being that this is your first Breguet that you're making. Jeff, what do you think?
So, yeah, to be honest with you, the only two of those four that I've really experimented with, actually I take that back. I've played a little bit with whole cone hops, but predominantly what I've used in my brewing career has been the pelletized hops or the lupulin powder. Lupulin powder is still relatively new to my game, and I've only tried it a few times, but yeah, I much prefer pelletized hops, both for the varieties available. They're another important thing to consider here, especially like me, if your fridge has a hop drawer, they store a lot better than the whole cone. An ounce of pelletized hops takes maybe a couple square inches out of that drawer, whereas an ounce of whole cone hops it's a substantial slug. It looks like it's roughly like the size of a wadded up pair of socks. It just takes up space. Like Ryan said, they soak up a lot more of the liquid, whether it's wort, whether it's your mead. If you're doing just a dry hop traditional, you're going to lose more to that vegetal matter, and I do think the vegetal matter is a little bit more volatile. You'll get a little bit more of that character from it. Whereas the only downside I can really say for pelletized hops is that they don't tend to stay in the pellet shape for more than a few seconds once they're introduced to water, and that can be a little bit messy. If you're not using like either one of those mesh dry hopping tubes or just like a little muslin bag for hops, something that can keep that together, you're gonna get a lot of hops in your lees, and it may have a harder time settling out at the end too. That's really the only negative thing I can say about pellets, just because those are when they make the pellet, basically what they're doing is grinding those whole cones into a paste and extruding it in like a Play-Doh machine, and then those pellets kind of just break down as they dry to the little 1/4-inch like sticks essentially that you get at the home brew store.
I've used both the leaf and the pellet. I kind of like the pellets. I mean, they're easy to use, but there's something that you got to be aware of if you're making a braggot and if you're getting into boiling your wort. One thing that you want to pay attention to, if you're just tossing the pellets into the boil like I did in the very beginning when I was first brewing beers, it's a mess on the bottom of your kettle. And in the old days, I would just dump my kettle into the fermenter, or everything went in. And what you wind up with in the end is a load of crap on the bottom of your fermenter that's just gooey. It's a gooey mess. Since then, I've got a really nice brew kettle from Anvil, and it has a spigot on it that is kind of adjustable. It sits up off the bottom of the pot. So when I'm done with my boil, I can actually turn that thing. Obviously you want to do that before you start your boil, before you put anything in the pot. I mean, you can turn it, up and down a little bit, to adjust the height of the suction off the bottom of the kettle. But I'm very lucky now with that pot because I can leave all of that crap on the bottom of the kettle. So as my wort settles, as it cools, I'm really not concerned about all the trub and crap that can get sucked up with it and into my fermenter. That's the cool thing about it. But since that point, I've also used a hop sock or I've also got this really cool looking stainless steel, very fine mesh hop can, I call it, that hangs over the side into the wort. That keeps everything pretty well self-contained, and I wind up with very little crap on the bottom of my Anvil brew kettle. So that's all I want to say there. Well, guys, we're going to leave it right there here at the Mead House. Good discussion today on some malts, and hope people were able to pick up on some inspiration. We talked a little bit about some recipes, at least some ideas to start. You gave me some ideas. I just got to buckle down and get to it. So, hey, thanks for listening here at this episode. And, if you need to let us know what you're brewing out there. We might even give you a call. You can email us at info@themeadhouse.com or just send us a message on Facebook or Twitter. Those are both at The Mead House. So in the meantime, like we always say, happy mead making. That's it for this episode. Ryan, you know the drill. Flip the lights off. Jeff, slam the door shut. Hey, we'll be back next week with episode number 153 of The Mead House. We're gone.